Chapter 8, Real Fear. McWindstorm Arren. Lamare was the only woman I ever feared, or should I say, used to fear. I squinted at her to make myself more intimidating. My tattoos already emanated power and the willingness to use it, but with her, I had to exude more menace. She walked towards me, and even though we were no longer together, her beauty still mesmerized me. True, I had not been in love with her, but it was impossible not to be fascinated by her brown eyes, framed by those dark lashes. The soft flow of her long braided brown hair and her luscious glowing skin heightened the enthrallment. In the darkest of nights, moon turns ago when we were still together, I could trace the curves of her naked body as she lay beside me on the royal bed, as though our twin moons, Luna and Risa, had found their peace at night beneath her skin. Lamare bowed when she was still a few yards away from my throne and then proceeded to prostrate, forehead almost touching the floor. Her skirt gathered around her like a blooming flower, and her right arm was outstretched to hand me her dues, the scroll for the coming fortnight. I stood from the throne and stepped down, yanking the manuscript out of her hand. I could not let her see any sign of weakness. I am McWindstorm Arren, the Emperor of Akea, the one who succeeded her father. Dogan, that burly man, stood by his post. He was looking at her too, probably wondering what Lamare and I were up to, but I ignored him as he was one of my guards, one with so hideous a power, fit only for a child. The only reason I took him as a palace guard was for his brawn. He had a huge body that could cover mine fully. I was, after all, only a man and an arrow could kill me quickly, but with Dogan blocking the view, I was sure my life would be spared, just like it was in the past. Every citizen had a place in Akea, and if this ugly man's duty was to take on 20 arrows plunging at him and still be able to stand up to fight and protect me, then so be it. My life is far too valuable. Besides, if he did die, nobody would ever miss him. He was so ugly that I think even his mother cringed at the sight of him when he was born. "Stand up, Lamare," I said coldly. I used to school my voice to sound like it was coated with ice, but I noticed that the more storms I brought, the more catastrophes I cast down on Akea, the colder my tone naturally became, as though my voice bore the destruction that befell the land. Lamare struggled to stand. Her face may have been stoic, but I could see past the clouded veils of her eyes. After all this time, she was still afraid of me, and that was good. It was what I needed all along. I cannot allow her to suddenly discern that if she had willed it in the past, she could have easily killed me. And for her to regret that she had not. I glanced outside the chamber's huge windows and saw the bigger of the two moons, Luna, perfectly still in the early morning light, as though hanging on a frame, and the artist has paid great attention to its perfect symmetry. Sisis's heat penetrated the thick palace walls, and even with the coldness that wrapped my heart in anxiety, the heat touched me too, and sweat coursed down my back. I returned to my throne and sat nonchalantly. I could not falter. I opened the scroll, and the cracking of brittle paper filled my ears. I started reading her graceful scripts, examining each turn of events in the next few days, carefully imagining each scene and how it would play out in Akea's history, and how they swayed in my favor as I had instructed. The first line took my attention immediately, but I glanced up as I sensed I was being watched and caught Lamare's eyes. I stared at her, but she held my gaze until perhaps she could not take it any more. She looked down on her lap towards her entwined, dainty fingers. She held my gaze for a few seconds longer. Her courage was growing, and I had to do something about it. Memories. I remember them from more than 10 moon turns ago. When I was so cold and distant from the world, when I was barely a man, and when all I could think about was how to make Akea mine. Northsum was then the emperor. Lamare was the beautiful princess. The emperor's charisma almost overthrew my attempts to rise into power, but I figured a way to outwit Northsum. It was true what the elders said, the better man wins. Always. The plotting was skillful because I was the master of my craft, but if I had to do it again, I would have done something differently. I would have killed Kino instantly regardless of the negotiation I had with Lamare and shut my ears to her pleading. Sparing Kino Amark's life has become a constant source of my worries, pulsing as though it were alive. Because should he manifest his true power, my claim to the throne would be jeopardized. A rebellion may spark, and sparks may turn into a fire that not even the storms that I create can quench. I have seen it happen, a brief glimpse into the future. This is why Kino must remain powerless. Minoan was my province, the wretched place where my father raised me. Across the land, there were mere farmlands and vineyards. Farming was the primary source of income, but my father's power was so limited, flawed even. He could make the land dry, and I failed to see how that could ever benefit a farmer. All the farmlands closed their gates on him because the landowners feared that one mistake from my father could eradicate a season's harvest, and with that, our chance to have a decent life vanished, and we were left to live on scraps. Instead, my father went to the vineyards and waited outside the gates every day to be selected as a grape picker. Luckily he was chosen, and his power would not compromise grape picking. This was the only job he ever could have. When I was 8, my mother ran away because father could not bring enough food to our table. At least, that was what I believed. Being the noblewoman that she was, my mother did not have the patience or the strength of character to give our family a chance. I have grown to believe that she has even detested the life we had together. That day, I was sitting in front of our house, waiting for my parents to return. The dark sky stretched across the horizon, and my father walked, dragging his feet towards me. "Come here, boy," he said. I scooted closer to him, and he took my hand. "Papa. No stories for you tonight, my boy. I'm exhausted. I don't want a story. I want." Father looked at me. "What?" "I want, Mama," I said. Father fell silent and released my hand. "She is not coming back." "But why?" "She said she loves me." "Go inside and sleep." "It's already late," Father commanded. "But..." "Go inside, Wind." I went inside with slumped shoulders. Like what Father exclaimed, Mother never did come back. That was when I became acquainted with a new kind of emotion. I thought it was desperation, the kind that one feels when it is difficult to explain what happened, and yet the longing to relive whatever it was that had been lost was so great. Eventually, that emotion wore off, and I became indifferent. It did not matter anymore if Mother would come back or not. She betrayed us. No explanation could make me love her again. In time, my indifference slowly evolved into a deep-seated, hateful resentment. I started loathing the memory of my mother. The emotion lingered inside me while I was growing up, and at times, I found myself losing control over my power. What was worse was that I didn't even care that I was losing control. It was during these times of full surrender to my rage that I felt truly powerful. When I was old enough to help my father, he took me to one of the vineyards where he worked. It was there that I saw how difficult life would be ahead of us. The wine lord, which was how the vineyard owner was addressed, walked about, sipping on his wine glass while everywhere, people of our rank sweated profusely to earn a few coins. Grape picking was not suitable for Papa and me. There was so much we should be doing. Exploring the world. Traveling. Looking for the lost dragon. Anything but this. I wanted to complain, but I saw in Papa an emotion that I could not define, a kind of determination chiseled deeply onto his hardened face. And so I kept my mouth shut, embarrassed about my thoughts for wanting something better. My mother had been gone from our lives for more than 4 turns of the moon by now, and during that time, I never once saw my father cry. Perhaps he had been trying to protect me by acting strong so that I would not have to worry. He was an honorable man for trying to be an exemplary model to me, but such a man could still have his lapses. It was a hot and humid day, the way it felt when both Luna and Risa reflected Sissus's heat back to Akea. I told my father that I would go to another portion of the vineyard, where I spotted just a few grape pickers, which meant that there was a chance for me to fill more baskets with grapes. I already had 3 full baskets in front of me when I heard a commotion from the part of the vineyard where I had left Father. The crowd was yelling. I stopped what I was doing and ran back and saw my father in the middle of the vineyard. All around him, the grapevine's posts were slanted and sticking out from the ground. "You! Get out!" Luca Arindala, the wine lord, yelled at Father. He was a thick man, with a beard so long it touched his chest. In his other hand, he held a whip. He raised his hand and hit father on the cheek. It was a strong slap because my father's head twisted, and I saw him wince. I caught my breath, afraid that he would fall unconscious. "I'm sorry. It all happened so fast. The land. It dried up. It's not like I wanted to destroy it," father said in a guttural voice. "And yet you did, you insufferable maggot." The wine lord hit father again, and it was as though the wine lord hit me too. We were poor, but we were not useless, not slaves that anyone could order around to do their whim. Not that low. Never. I ran towards the wine lord and pushed him using my power. He went tumbling several yards away until his body was blocked out of view by a stump. The crowd shifted their gazes from the wine lord to father, and then to me. The wine lord glared at me with fury in his eyes as he struggled to stand up. "Out!" he yelled. "No, master, please don't," father begged as he moved in front of me to protect me. The wine lord rushed forward, and as soon as he was within father's arm's reach, he slapped father. Father started to sob. I could not bear to have my father so shamed by the wine lord, and unawares, I dryly pleaded, "Please, sir. I apologize." The wine lord leered at me. "You pushed me, and yet you think by saying sorry in that tone, I will give you your jobs back?" I had no control over my power then, but the heavens must have bled with me. Unknowingly, while my eyes were still closed, I hummed. The melody pierced my ears as though it was coming from somewhere ethereal. The air became moist, surrounding me and then pressing against my body. When I opened my eyes to the heavens, the clouds had started to gather above. "Wind, no!" father shouted, pulling at my arm. The other grape pickers around us kept silent, wanting to know what would happen next. The wine lord's bodyguards moved forward, unsheathing their swords. Then Luca squeezed past through them and pushed father. A sting crisscrossed my chest as Luca's whiptail hit me. I lost control. I stopped humming and fed rage into my heart. I had to be cold. I ignored the sounds that came out from one spectator's mouth to the next, murmuring across the vineyard. I ignored the ruckus of the onlookers and the incessant curses of the wine lord. Then it happened. A kind of coldness I had never felt as strongly before suddenly overwhelmed me. Lightning flashed from the sky, shooting down to the vineyard, barely missing the wine lord. The lightning sent the ground bursting upwards, and I fell backward on the impact. Luca fell back to the opposite side. He was gawking at me with eyes that almost popped from their sockets. The people, dazed, shocked, and frightened out of their wits, huddled together, clinging to each other in sheer panic. "Wind, please," father begged. "You don't need to do this, son." His words failed to assuage my anger, and I laughed at his futile attempt to control me. I was roaring with laughter, feeling the power inside my chest as rage boiled in my veins. And then, suddenly and without warning, an overwhelming sense of calm enveloped me. It was a warm, fuzzy feeling that started in my stomach and spread up to my chest and then down through my veins, finally reaching my fingertips and toes. I looked up to the sky and summoned lightning, but it did not come. Confused, I tried to sort out my emotions. There was no loathing. Instead, I was empty inside. Strange. I was taken aback, surprised to know my hatred, anger, and fear could so quickly leave me. Instead, an emotion I was not so accustomed to lingered inside of me, peace. I did not know that letting go of my usual emotions could feel so relaxing. The people around me had wide eyes that riveted to me as though I was part of a freak show. Or maybe what their eyes registered was not judgment but fear. I could not really tell. A lady with black hair stood out in the crowd. My gaze lingered on her sculpted face, her thin nose, and dark eyes, which were unreadable as they stared right back at me. I pictured my father as he was beaten by the wine lord again and again and again inside my head, and slowly, the storm that was lost started to come to life, but as I continued to gaze at the dark beauty, calm once again quenched my rage. Her face was stoic, a serene mask. I surprised myself when I lifted my hands to summon lightning, But instead of the electric current flashing from the sky, I slowly fanned out my arms, willing rain to fall to the ground. Water poured from the sky and touched the aridity that my father had caused. The vines responded to the rain in a minute, absorbing the nourishment that I was bringing. I could swear that the leaves became greener than when we first started picking out the grapes. "Oh, my gods! Blessings!" Luca said, ecstatic. "My lad, you will make me rich." His words were to compliment my power, but I did not care for any of them. I was looking at father. He had been scared for a while, afraid that the turmoil inside my chest would flow out freely because I still had no control over my power. But now, looking at his eyes, I got an affirmation for what I had done. "You have your toils back," the wine lord yelled, and the crowd grew silent once more. The wine lord's bodyguards sheathed their swords back into their scabbards. I walked towards my father and offered a hand to help him up. He was jittery on his feet, and I had to put my arm around his waist to steady him. "I don't need your toil," I said defiantly to the wine lord. "What? You cannot refuse such an offer." "This," the wine lord said, extending his hands, gesturing around his vineyard, "is what your power is for. We can be partners. Your wage shall increase if you do what it was you showed us." "No. Wind, we need the labor, at least for a while. Please, I beg you, take what the wine lord has so graciously offered," father said. His eyes were fixed upon mine, drawing out from me a response that I did not want to give. But how could I refuse father and his simple request? It did not matter that the huge man in front of me was the epitome of slavery. "Only for you, Papa," I said slowly, considering. "Good. Good," Luca said, his face splitting into a huge grin. "Please kneel to seal our agreement." Father fell on his knees to comply, his hand pulling me down with him while I struggled to keep my ground. "I will, but you will also have to kneel," I said to the wine lord. "To seal the deal between equals." I was nervous as I said the words. It was the first time I had ever negotiated with a powerful man. Equals? That's preposterous. I knelt in front of Luca as he kept on rambling about how rich he was and how we were only servants who were showered with ill-deserved gifts from the gods. As I stared at him, I could no longer control myself. I summoned air and shoved it against his back. He swayed until he lost balance and fell to his knees right in front of us. His face was a confused mess. "What the?" "It is done then," I said. In a louder voice, I added, "a partnership." The crowd around us cheered because they knew that I could make the vineyard flourish with my power, which only meant more grapes to harvest and more compensation for all of them. One of the onlookers asked for my name, and they passed it on from one mouth to the next until everybody knew who I was. And that was when it dawned on Luca that he could no longer contest my terms. Our deal was sealed by the 100 witnesses chanting my name. After the incident at the vineyard, the lady with black hair and dark eyes approached me. She seemed older than I, but not by many moon turns. "Is it always like this?" she asked. I looked up, shying away from her. "What do you mean, my lady?" "The storm. The rage?" she asked, cocking an eyebrow at me. I shook my head. "Worse then?" I looked up again. I was sitting on the ground, and she loomed over me. I felt like I did not deserve to be spoken to by such a lady. "No." She laughed, and it was the most soothing sound I had ever heard in my life. "I'm Saul," she said as she extended her hand. I never felt hands so soft before, aside from a faint memory of my mother's. "I'm Wind," I replied. She sat on the ground beside me. "That's quite a fitting name. It suits you." The people around us were busily picking grapes as though nothing had happened. Their fear of the earlier incident seemed to have been replaced by a buoyant attitude after learning of my partnership with the wine lord. "Are you from here?" I asked, and then almost forgetting myself, I quickly added, "my lady." She smiled again. I wondered how a woman's teeth could be so white and perfect. "No, but I have duties on this land." "Oh. All right. I think I can teach you how to control your power. This made me pause. No one had ever bothered to talk to me about powers in the past. How? I asked. Controlling my power was quite a challenge for me to learn. Like what the scholars said, haphazard powers, although powerful, proved to be the hardest to harness. Here. She poked a finger to my chest. What's inside is going to help you control your power. Don't think about harnessing its strength if you have yet to master control over it first. Otherwise, there will be chaos. Fear is an obstruction that's difficult to break through, but you will be free and more confident to conquer your strength once you have done so. You have to control from deep within, from your heart. Oddly, I understood clearly what she was trying to say. It was difficult to explain. But when I was angry, my rage flowed through my veins, and it was this rage pumping at my heart that gave me the feeling that I could burn entire villages to the ground with a single summon of lightning. I use it to guide me, I said, referring to my heart. But usually, I'm too angry at the world to focus on controlling my power. I found myself gazing into her dark eyes. I was unsure if it was her face, her black eyes, her serene face, or her voice that calmed me down. Her face was pure serenity, a stark contrast to the angry storm clouds that hovered above. Let me show you how. She moved closer to me, her skirt dragging as she leaned forward. She placed a hand on my chest. Now, close your eyes. I did as I was told, and after a few seconds, her hands warmed my chest. When she looked at me earlier, I felt peace, an emotion I could put a name to. But when her hand softly and yet firmly pressed against my chest, my heart thudded in fast rhythms, making me feel weak and unmindful of everybody else. I could not understand any of it. It was surreal, and I got lost in the moment. There was something so calming and nurturing about Saul that when I opened my eyes and looked up to the sky, the storm clouds were gone. Instead, Sisis was shining brightly. Luna and Risa were like two guardians mirroring each other's movements on opposite ends of the horizon. You made the storm go away, said Saul proudly. Although the storm was also your creation. A burst of melodious laughter escaped her lips. I was awed. I could not believe what I had done. I always knew I could destroy things with my power, but I never thought I could reverse them. When you're done admiring yourself, I could teach you more, she said. My mouth was wide open as I looked at her. She was serious. Her dark eyes glittered, and this time, I was able to read past her serene mask. She was happy. And as for me, I was quite taken by this lady. Grapes. More grapes. Then barrels, hundreds of them. Thousands even. No matter where I turned, I would see them, and I felt proud of what my father and I had achieved. Papa and I were not rich yet. That was still a distant promise, but we were no longer grape pickers. On some days, I even hold a whip and walk around the vineyard. The feeling of authority made me feel lightheaded, a kind of addiction that I began to like. During those days, I found comfort with Saul. I never asked her what her ability was, but I had a pretty good hunch. I think it had something to do with serenity. With calmness. Because no matter how gloomy my mood was, she could make it lighter. It was another ordinary day at the vineyard, and I was looking forward to spending time with Saul. I watched her from a distance and smiled to myself before moving closer to her. Her long, curly, black hair flowed down her back, the ends touching her waist. She was wearing a white dress that was tight at the waist but loose everywhere else. All that was missing was a crown atop her head, and she could have passed for a goddess. There was a certain tenderness that I felt towards her. Perhaps she sensed that I was looking at her too intently because right before I reached her, she glanced at me, a smile painted on her face. "Wind," she said. "There's something that I'm dying to show you." Her smile grew wider. "Is it something you learned by following your heart?" I nodded. Then I opened my arms, gathered scoops of air, formed an invisible pair of hands, and lifted her at the waist. "Oh my!" She laughed. I moved her towards me with the invisible pair of hands made from the air around us. "Put me down." "It's not funny anymore," she said. For a while, She seemed to be concentrating until I understood what she was doing. "Your power won't work on me," I said. "You see, I'm happy and calm already." I spread out my hands and laughed. Then I let the air holding her up vanish, and she fell into my already outstretched arms. Saul looked up at me. "You shouldn't do that to me again," she said in a chastising tone. Her warm body felt like home to me. "I thought you would like it," I said before adding, "but not as much as you're going to like what's going to happen next." "Oh, don't be presumptuous, Mr. Arren," she said before giggling. I had practiced that line inside my head for months. Being younger than Saul, I was always intimidated by her carefree spirit and beauty, but the moment she had sat beside me months ago and taught me how to control my ability, I knew that she was perfect for me. We could grow old together, in power, an ideal complement to each other. She looked at me like she was trying to read my mind, and in a way, I guess she did. She stopped laughing, and when I moved my lips closer to her, she leaned forward and met me halfway for a kiss. I knew that to kiss her was my destiny because I felt complete the moment our lips touched. Then from afar, I heard a commotion that had become an all too familiar sound lately. My father's voice tore the calmness of the surroundings. Saul broke away from the kiss and pulled at my hand as we ran towards the source of the uproar. The crowd had started to gather, and we squeezed in, trying to take our position in the audience. The smell of sweat filled the air. The humidity was getting to all of us, and maybe I should do something about it. Perhaps I could make it drizzle later. "Marcella! Please!" Father shouted. Saul clutched tightly at my arm as though to let me know that she was there for me. My father was drunk. This happened every time he closeted himself with a barrel of wine. I loosened myself from Saul's grip and walked towards my father. "Come on, Father. Let's go home." Father looked at me with red eyes that could not seem to focus. "Why won't she come home, Wind? I'm tired of waiting for her, son," he sobbed. It was unsettling to see him that way. My mother was of noble blood, and she once chose this man over all the riches of the world, but a woman had to follow her heart, or her mind for that matter. Comfort was something everybody was willing to pay the price for, even if it meant giving up on one's family. Seeing my father like this made me loathe my mother even more. The only suffering that remained in our family was her. I helped father to his feet, and Saul came towards us to assist me. She smelled of mint herbs. When she took my father's other arm and put it on her shoulder, he only cried louder. "My dear Marcella! When will you come home?" he groaned in between breaths. I shook my head and pitied my father. "Marcella! I had to do something about this. Maybe ask her to come home with me. Maybe our family could still be saved. Maybe. Maybe. Maybe." Lost in thoughts, I turned to look at Saul after she pinched me on my torso. I raised an eyebrow to ask her why she had done that. Instead of answering, she gazed at the sky, and I saw the storm clouds. "What are you looking at?" I shouted at the grape pickers. "Go back to your grape picking. We're not handing out wages, so you can just stand and watch." I trembled as I said that, my eyes blazing with fury. "Wind," Saul whispered. I heard her, and I choked on my anger and pushed it down somewhere I could not reach it. I looked at Saul, to the brightness that she exuded, and I remembered myself. "Forgive me, Saul," I whispered. Saul did not respond. I did the right thing. This was what needed to be done. I scanned the scroll until I was sure I understood everything written on it. I could see no loopholes in it. What I was holding in my hands was the scroll that spoke of what would happen to Akea in the next 14 days, a strategy to ensure that power would always be mine. Now, to make them all come true. I pointed with my forefinger to the words on the scroll and summoned lightning until a small dose of it came shooting out of my fingertip. As soon as the sparks hit the scripts, they burned the words and sealed them as prophecies. Akea would always be mine. I glanced at Lamare. She was seated with her eyes on mine, waiting for instructions. Dogan was still at the door, talking with someone else. No matter how far I had sunk into darkness, I would never forget that sweet voice. Dogen moved aside, and I saw Saul's serene face. Saul, the only woman that my heart ever sang for, with a face as beautiful a melody as her name.